Hello, and thank you so much for joining us for today's Insight event, which has been supported by Rolex. My name's Alexandra Coghlan. I am a classical music journalist, critic, and author, and I'm going to be chairing this panel discussion on gatekeeping in opera. It's a topic as both a woman in a still very male-dominated field, and as someone in my 30s in a profession where age is still very much synonymous with status and authority, that I'm very passionate about discussing. And it would be lovely to really try and drill down today and find some answers, as well as raising some important questions. Just to give you some context for this event, the panel discussion is part of the Royal Opera's Engender Festival. The Engender Initiative works to right gender imbalance across opera and music theatre and to push for gender equality in all areas of the field. The annual festival celebrates the work of women and gender minorities in opera through performances, work in progress, workshops, and discussions like this, all of which you'll be seeing this week as part of the festival. Now, tonight for this discussion, we have 4 panelists, and I'd just like to give you a very brief introduction to all of them. Starting with soprano Allison Buchanan, a soprano who has performed all over the world with artists including Simon Rattle, Joan Sutherland, Pavarotti, and she's also the artistic director of the Brixton-based Pegasus Opera. And Pegasus, as a charity, aims to provide opportunities in opera for people from diverse backgrounds and to promote opera in underserved, diverse communities. We have another soprano, Kate Royal, whose list of awards is very long and includes the Kathleen Ferrier Prize, the RPS Award, Glyndebourne's John Christie Award, among others. She's sung at the Royal Opera House, Glyndebourne, the Met, Paris Opera, and with Berlin Phil. Next up, we have Mia Tanström. Mia is a freelance performer across various different genres, and she's also the project manager for Key Change, a movement that takes action to promote underrepresented genders through training, mentoring, and network support. Last but not least, we have Anna Morrissey, who is a movement director, choreographer, and a director who has worked across theatre, dance, and opera. You may have seen her work in the West End, at the National Theatre, the RSC, and she's also working on the Royal Opera's own forthcoming Rigoletto with Oliver Mears. So I'd like to start off with a very broad question to give us, I suppose, some context on what's to come and to touch very lightly on some of the issues we're going to delve much more deeply into over the next hour. So perhaps all of you could answer this question, perhaps in the order in which I introduced you. So starting with Alison, it would be lovely to know what is gatekeeping to you? How does it present itself in opera? And what has your experience of it been? Alison, over to you.
Hi. Well, gatekeeping for me is the people who tell the audience and the public who loves, who we should see, who, what music we should appreciate. And for me, I've encountered it in many instances in my life in terms of colorism, sizeism. And, I've been told, well, that I'm not a realistic, because of being Rubenesque, I'm not a realistic example of people who love. And so, are you going to be sexy? Are you going to be, and love comes in all sizes, else all the people that are over a size 14 would never be married and never be. So it's gatekeeping. And interesting for me now is that I am also now a gatekeeper. So I've always had to experience gatekeeping and barriers and people that say that I shouldn't do this.
We're just losing Alison
because they were.
We're just losing Alison there for a bit. Alison, can we come back to you in just a second?
Black. Yeah, certainly.
Sorry, Kate, could you pick up there? We'll circle back to Alison at the end when her connection's settled.
Thank you.
Yeah, for me, gatekeeping really is about when whoever's controlling the narrative of the art form, and who controls, who has access to the art form, not only in terms of audiences, but also who has access to make money, earning a living from performing or being part of the making of opera, what opera is, who it's for, and who is allowed to make a living from it. So I suppose the gatekeepers would be certainly casting directors, promoters, agents to a certain extent, but it filters right down to teachers and government, essentially music education, which is where I believe the changes need to begin.
Mia?
Gatekeeping for me, I'm a Swede, and as I told you, we don't have that the word in Swedish, so I had to really look into the concept, and of course it's there, but we don't have the word. And I was thinking a lot about the interpretation of this panel, of the interpretation of the word gatekeeping, to expand the idea, and I haven't really thought about it, that the audience can be a gatekeeper, or that you yourself can be a gatekeeper. That was very interesting thoughts. But I tend to think about intersectionality, of course, immediately when you're talking about classical music. That is something that we talk about a lot. For me personally, it would be that, when I applied for school, there were 70% women and 30% men who applied. And of course, there are 15% female roles, at least in theater. So that was one gatekeeper. And then I would say from my personal experience that maternity is a great gatekeeper, since it changes you. You're supposed to be a symbol, like Allison was talking about. You're supposed to be a symbol, and mostly you're supposed to be young, beautiful, and slim. So when you enter, and white maybe, when you enter maternity, you become something else, which is a new kind of symbol. When you have a pregnant belly, then you are all of a sudden, boom, you're a saint or you're a Madonna, and you cannot be sexy, you cannot have a hierarchical role, you know what I mean? So, there are a lot of gatekeepers out there that I haven't considered as gatekeepers, but let's go get them.
Anna, I can see you smiling at that.
Yeah, I mean, I want to pick up on something Kate started to say, which is about music education. I think it's just the sort of defining of the world of opera, the word opera, the fact that in itself, just that access to music education in schools, I think is a real, before we even get into the industry, I think is a huge defining ring around something that you could access or you couldn't. And it's something I feel really passionate about, because I was such a beneficiary of education in school. It didn't come via my family particularly, it came through schools, and it was, I really benefited from it. And I didn't touch opera for 15 years, but I went to primary school very near the Opera House, actually, just around the corner, a little C of E school called St Clement Danes on Drury Lane. And we sung all the time. We just sung all the time. And we also had outreach from ENO. So they would come and do projects. We'd go and see work. We'd come back and do projects again. And it was just, I think growing up with something like that, I then had, very normal comprehensive school, but great access to state education in terms of the arts. And I think that is that is really under threat. The arts, the subjects, artistic. So the value of artistic work in school is going down, or is going backwards. It's going the wrong way, I think, from my experience growing up in London in state education. I'm 40 now, so back 30 years. I think it's getting worse, actually. And I think there's lots of people fighting a bigger tide of this government that just don't value it. So I think that's something I feel really passionate about. But I think that is a real, that just sets up so much about one's understanding or one's permission to kind of go into the world and even know that it's there.
We know that it's not valued because we've seen that of what's happened in the last year and a half. So we know that it's not valued as the creative subjects are not, the creative industry is not valued by the government. So it's pretty clear why the education of music is in the state that it's in, and that is not doing a disservice to the huge amounts of incredible people in schools who are teaching, really high quality music. But my fear is it's around the sort of GCSE age that the other subjects become important because they need to get the grades, but the creative subjects are kind of left behind. And even for children that are not looking to have a career in music, we know the benefits, and it should absolutely be compulsory right the way through school in some shape or form. I had a couple of terms where I was teaching in a local school. I live in South London, and I was teaching one-to-one lessons to teenagers, classical singing. So I was just introducing them to what it is, what the art form is, opera, and they did not know what opera was. They didn't know what the word meant. They had never heard of Pavarotti. They, at this very, very basic level. Yet they were all children, young adults, who had potentially great voices. And this is what has been increasingly frustrating, is that the untapped talent in these schools, it's there waiting for us. It's there waiting to be guided and taken on that journey of training. Yet there is no system in place for those people to be picked up and moved to the first rung of the ladder.
Which is exactly what the founder of Key Change said, that talent is everywhere, but opportunity is not. So we need to provide the opportunity not to, we need to have those talents in our lives.
And I think it's remarkable for someone like myself to be doing what I do, because when I was 11 and pretending I was an opera singer in school, the music teacher who didn't have many people interested, but maybe had a bit of a budget, was like, okay, what do you want to sing? I played the violin for like 2 weeks. I played the flute. I played all these instruments, probably because he didn't have many people trying to use the money that he had. And then I went to a private girls' school after that comprehensive school in a very multicultural town. I went to private school, and they really took me to the next level because they really were immersed in training of classical music and musicians. So, considering my cultural background and where I grew up, it's quite remarkable that I'm here. And, for him, the first music teacher, there was no gatekeeping. It was just someone's interested, doesn't matter where she's from or what her background, let's just use the money that I have. I don't know.
It's interesting that you've raised economics there, because I wonder if the gatekeeping in the educational instance is economic, or whether it's to do with a snobbery, it's not for the likes of you, or whether it's just a complete failure to recognize the value of it. Kate, do you have feelings on that?
I think the reality of training as an opera singer, it's an extremely expensive pursuit, and the youngsters that start even at a music conservatoire, which is where many young people will sort of begin their formal training, for them to even get to that point, they have to have had serious financial investment. They already have to have a serious musical underpinning, training of all the other aspects, not just of the voice, but the learning how to read music, understanding of all the different things that one needs to know, music theory, to get to that point. So that is why it has to begin early, because yes, we can sorry, I've slightly lost my train of thought. To even get to that point, it's a huge investment from the point of parents, supportive parents that can afford to educate their children in music up until the age of 18 or 19, where that formal training begins. So I think for me, I do believe it's financial.
And I suppose a question to all of you, in which case, is, are we not making our case adequately as classical musicians, or in terms of opera, are we inadvertently gatekeeping by keeping the conversation within the circle and not advocating enough or in the right way, perhaps using the right language for our art form?
In Sweden, education is free, so I don't think it's that in Sweden. I performed a lot on schools with Renaissance music ensembles that I'm in. I've been performing for almost 10 years in various schools, and for me, the idea of opera is a gatekeeper in itself, because when people, what people know of opera might not be what opera is for us, who are really into it. So we have developed musical scenes that really gets to these young audiences. I've been climbing out in the audience and saying hello, like literally to them, to Orlando, to Bonjour mon cœur, like and singing at the same time, and, you know, grabbing my gown and running around and like behaving in a non-opera way, which took away all these like awe towards the art form. And I think that maybe that is one thing that you can do, like try to find a way to really connect to the young audiences.
Once the young professionals have, you know, overcome those economic barriers and they've arrived at a professional level, I mean, it doesn't stop there, does it? I was thinking about just the basic business of being an opera singer. You know, in a normal job, you have set hours, you have a set workplace, you have a structure, but this isn't necessarily true.
There's no structure.
Can you tell me, Kate, in terms of just the basic business of, you know, if you get a schedule on a Friday night for a Monday morning, if you might be called for a rehearsal at, you know, till 10 p.m. at night, how is that different from a normal job, and what are the barriers do you think that has thrown up for you and for others in the profession?
I think opera's a unique system in that way, in that often you'll only get a schedule the night before. So you can't plan anything. So if you're working on a particular production, some companies will just send you a text saying, oh, you need to be in at 9 tomorrow, or you don't, you know. And so especially for people that have young families or anyone else that needs looking after, it's very, very difficult to get, or, you know, to be organized enough for you to do your job well. And I think that's the key, is that we, the people making the schedule, I'm pretty sure that if they were parents, or if they had responsibilities of looking after elderly parents, then they would get really good at making schedules. But for some reason, it seems to be often at the whim of the director, who might be in a bad mood that night, and they suddenly demand that these singers are in on that day. Having said that, I'm married to an actor, and the system for him is completely different, in that they are all required all the time. And there is no question that the star is not going to be going to the rehearsal. So I think the hierarchy of opera in terms of the cast is something which is damaging to everybody. And so often you will have, you know, a very high profile singer walking in 2 days before the show and doing their thing, whereas everyone else has been working for weeks on end to get to that point. And that is not an environment, I don't think, for great work.
Interesting, that question of hierarchies. I wonder if any of the rest of you have encountered that in the process of opera, or indeed the rehearsal room.
I once did a production with Franco Zeffirelli in LA, and it was Domingo and Veronica Villarreal. And because Domingo had decided not to come, Veronica said she wasn't coming, so Zeffirelli was coming. So, you know, it's like we need a Neda, we need a this, but it, you know, it was just the hierarchy, and that they could come when they like, and because Domingo couldn't come, she wouldn't come, and then, you know, and they just came when they were ready. So I think it's very common.
I have the opposite experience since
I don't know if anyone else, because I span the theatre world as well. There's something called PIPA, P-I-P-A, which is Parents in the Performing Arts. I don't know if you guys have heard of them or
yes,
aware of them.
I read the
they
report. It's absolutely fantastic.
For, you know, some of the things we're talking about, which is around scheduling, but supporting parents, and often it's particularly women who take on caring responsibilities as they become parents, for better practice around exactly that, scheduling, and other things, contractual, and, you know, can we find different working or better working practices. So funny enough, I'll just say, as someone who works in theatre, I find opera can be better organized than theatre. You know, the schedules, sometimes because of the chorus, you know, the chorus has this schedule, and you can't argue with that schedule. The lunch break is the lunch break. It's not kind of half an hour, 20 minutes into it, which in theatre is a lot, you know, it's a lot more kind of, well, we haven't quite finished what we're making. And but yeah, Pippa is a great organisation, and I think have made some strides. I became a mum 6 years ago, and it coincided with Pippa being launched. I have felt a cultural sea change in theatre around it. Lots more directors now are open to a conversation as how can this work for you, with myself as a collaborator, but with the cast as well. And I can't say it happens every time, but more or less, I feel that people are trying to build schedules and also, and you know, and do that thing of like, I'll let you know if we're going to work a Saturday or an evening. So they sort of recognizing those times. And certainly when I make schedules, I really try to factor all of that in and be as like produce advanced schedules as far in advance as possible.
For me, here is where the financial part comes in, because you need to have a babysitter that doesn't cost you a fortune. And for me, that has been the two grandmothers of my family who have been there. Like one December, we had 18 nights that they had to, before Christmas Eve, that they had to babysit. And that is, I mean, that is almost the whole whole month. And for me to be dependent on my my mother-in-law and my mother to have an income, that was not the best solution, but that was the most affordable one. So within Key Change, we're trying to give people bursaries to be able to participate in the program and bring childcare and the child. And I would say that that is the solution to this problem, that you should be able to have your child with you at your working place. I did a commercial once, that was 15 years ago, but my baby wouldn't leave my breast, you know. He wouldn't, I was like, he can stay home with his father, it's no problem, but he refused. So I was like, oh gosh, I need to take the baby with me if I'm gonna film. Oh, how will they interpret this? And I approached them via email and said, I'm so sorry, I thought the baby would take the bottle, but he doesn't. Can I please bring him? And since I was the star of this darn commercial, they just replied and said, yeah, sure, we get a babysitter. And can you please bring a pair of blue jeans as well? And I was like, what? Isn't it more difficult than that? Yeah, because there's money and they really wanted me. So it wasn't an issue at all. And I was like, wow, what if that was the case in every working situation? Like, yeah, of course, bring the baby. We'll find a babysitter and we'll have a room prepared for you and your changing station and everything. I wish that for us in the future.
Has anyone had that experience in opera, that they're allowed to, they have that flexibility to bring in kids? And
I had the opposite. I was doing a job and I was asked not to bring. I mean, I could get the schedule worked around my breastfeeding schedule, but I couldn't bring the baby into the room. That was already a health and safety thing. So I did all the feeding in the foyer.
Wow.
So I was too tired to push back at the time.
I've actually even taken my baby on stage with me. I don't know if that is secure, but my baby was a part of like the show.
Mm-hmm. Alison, I wonder, you mentioned earlier that you've gone from some kind of gatekeepy to gatekeeper, as you're now an artistic director. Is there anything you've brought to your kind of the best practice of your company that you've learned from the other side of the table on this kind of very practical?
Yeah, definitely. You know, the mission of Pegasus is diversity and inclusion and making it accessible. So I feel like I have a tremendous responsibility to, on all levels, to try and be a good gatekeeper. And that's sort of the very, and it is very influenced by all the barriers that I had in my career and all the experiences I had. So, you know, when we cast, we are looking at being diverse, and that doesn't mean all Black. It's a mixture. It's multicultural, like the society we live in. When we don't think about size either so much, you know, we just try and be as inclusive as we can, and we're thinking about the audience that we want. So, you know, I'm not really one for singing opera in English, but I hear a lot of our audience say, well, you know, we can't understand the opera singers and they're always singing in a foreign language. So, you know, why are we going? So a lot of the things that we do are in English so that we can eliminate that barrier, because that is a barrier that a lot of our audience might face. And then, you know, for us, we are concerned about, we want people to come, we want opera for everyone. And that means when you go to an opera, you want to see people who look like you on the stage, in the pit, and in the book, as you're flicking through, oh, lighting designer. So we try to, you know, cover everything so that, and we want the kids to look at the stage and say, oh, I can do that. Oh, I can do that. And when I started singing, I thought, well, I must be the only black opera singer in England, because I didn't see anybody that did that. And then as I got further on in my career, I started hearing about, you know, I learned about Jessie Norman, Leontine Price, all these other people. But it's important when you go into schools to do school programs, where are you going? What is the demographic? So, you know, or I had a conversation with someone who has a prison program, and, you know, a lot of the prisoners in America are African American. And he's like, well, we send in all these white opera singers. I said, well, you know, that's kind of patronizing. You need to find some black singers to go in, so that, you know, it helps broaden their perspectives.
I've got some stats for you all, which I wonder if you could sort of respond to for me. I was slightly shocked putting these together, that this was a 2020 survey, which was looking at the gender gap in British, it was theatre and performing arts quite broadly, that 31% of artistic directors are women, and that falls down to single figures, obviously if you're just looking at opera. 10% of critics are women, and there's a 2-to-1 ratio in roles being filled by men compared to women. Perhaps Mia, starting with you, can you account for this? Presumably at Key Change, this is something you're very much actively looking to address.
Exactly, that is actually the reason why Key Change is here, and the statistics, and we are trying to adjust them. I mean, the project sprung out of the 75-25 or sometimes 90-10. You know the figures, you've seen them throughout the music industry. It's there all over the place. It started. Key Change started with representations on popular music festivals, but I mean, I've been handling Key Change's social media for 2 years. We do something called Friday Figures. So every Friday we post some kind of figure, some kind of statistics from the music industry, and it's there. It's all over the place. It's in every aspect. So that's what we're trying to adjust. With all the barriers that we have within the industry, we're trying to target them and make the music industry more available to women and gender minorities. So yes.
Can you tell us a bit about how you're doing that? So what are the practical steps that we can all?
I was trying to save that to last, but of course, no, we have this piece of our project that we call the Pledge, the Key Change Pledge, which was initiated actually by the 6 partners who were joined by us in the beginning, the 6 music festivals who wanted to work with us in this project. It's an EU Creative Europe finance project. So it's only in Europe and Canada. And it was initiated by them, and they said, could we make some kind of pledge? Could we really make sure that we are doing this work, and can we show it to the world? Of course, yeah, let's create a pledge. And that was in 2017, 6 pledgers, and we celebrated the number 500 a month ago. So now we have 500 music organizations who have signed the Key Change Pledge. And the Key Change Pledge is a pledge that you are to hold yourself accountable, and you are to work towards representation and especially gender balance within your organization, and you can adapt the pledge in the way that suits you. It started out with representation on music festivals, on lineups. But if you, for example, are a music magazine or a radio, I mean, the EBU signed the Key Change Pledge like a month ago. So that is huge. And the thing with the pledge is that you can adapt it in the way that suits your organization, and it puts this on the table and the issues on the table. Like, is it the board? Is it the technicians? Is it the orchestra? Where do we need to work with this? We probably need to work with it everywhere, but it might not always be the case because people have been hired, all these things. but we love how people approach us, and it's like, okay, can we get help? Yes, you can get help, and there is no shame, no blame. It's only come to us, let us help us, let us do best practice for others, let's do this, let's just show the world that this is doable. So yeah.
I wonder, asking all of you, how often as creative women, and obviously also talking about gender minorities, you find yourself in either an organisation or a rehearsal room that is purely male driven still? Has anything changed in during your careers even? Have you seen improvement?
I have actually, yeah. Particularly, I would say in theatre more than opera. I started working, 17 years ago, and I think the first decade of my career on the creative team, I was the only woman, I would say. I very rarely worked with female directors. And of course, the repertoire, in theatre as well, it was, largely male plays. And I did a lot of work at the RSC, and, the rep, maybe had 3 women compared to 20 men in a company. So definitely, I think the early stages of my career was really defined by that. I have to say, over the last 5, 6, 7 years, that I have felt shift. I do now, I would say, predominantly work with female directors, and that's also a choice I'm choosing to make, and I'm lucky that I can beginning to be able to make that choice. But it's now more, it's as normal for me to work alongside a female director, I would say, in theatre, and on the creative teams, it is more gender balanced. I don't think the creative teams are racially, ethnically very balanced. Yeah, it's becoming more so, but that is a bit more of an anecdote from theatre. I think opera, for me, is very much still, as I would say, like 10 years ago in theatre.
For me, a lot of my career was in America. I went to study at the Curtis Institute, and from the very beginning, I was with women creatives and directors, and so that was my experience. So it never really occurred to me that I didn't think about it. In England, the opera that I did, it was all male actually, but in America, I find them much more progressive. Actually, it was probably more women dominated directors and conductors. My first woman conductor actually was Jane Glover, and that was in England. But so in America, I think they seem a few steps ahead when it comes to that.
Kate, I wonder, as a performer, perhaps you can tell us, I'm sure you found yourself in a situation where you're in a room with a male conductor, a male director. Do you find that changes the dynamic of a room at all? For you as a performer, do you feel differently, more vulnerable, less? It makes no difference?
It doesn't make a difference for me, no. I mean, I think it's more in terms of the casting and management where it seems to make a difference. So if I think about, we're going back to the subject, but again, becoming a mother, but the offshoot of that is vocal changes and, the hormonal changes, and women are way more directly affected by hormonal changes than men, which creates a very much more complex journey for us as singers and as people that want to have long careers. And so that's something that I have found there really has been very little understanding about. And I think the management and casting directors really need to educate themselves on this subject. Singers don't really talk about it as well, so that's an issue. I'm always trying to encourage singers to discuss vocal health and how interlinked our voices are with our minds, and how anxiety and depression and all of these things, which so many of us suffer on a sliding scale throughout our lives, how these things can so directly affect the voice. And I've certainly been have sort of borne the brunt of issues post childbirth, and have had very little understanding from companies that I would say have been quite loyal to me. So yes, I think there's certainly a lot of education on that front that needs to happen. I think I was referenced in a review where they said knackered from motherhood. When I was singing a major role in a major opera house. So I think that would not be written today, I think. But it's a subject that really needs to be discussed, and singers who go through vocal issues, which I believe all singers go through because it's impossible not to, it's very helpful if they can talk openly, because it's all such a stigma hush-hush kind of scenario, especially within the A houses, and people have to expected to hide it, and then through being told to hide their issues, of course they multiply a million times. So I'm on a bit of a mission to get singers to talk and talk to each other as well, because by talking we can obviously learn from each other, but companies need to educate themselves about the lifelong journey of a voice and what happens and how it changes. Yeah.
I absolutely agree with you, Kate. And our industry is so unforgiving. They always say you're as good as your last performance, and there's so many variables, like you say, that we have. I remember at San Francisco Opera, one of the young artists had a baby, and it took away the top of her voice. And I forget what it's called, but it's a thing. It's actually a thing that has a name. And, there was no understanding. And so, and I think you're right in having dialogues and talking openly about it. That's been my thing about diversity. Let's just have the conversation. People then learn and they understand, the directors and the people that run the opera house, because it's very unforgiving.
It's this sort of worship within opera. That people love to worship opera singers, and the glamour and the pedestal that singers are put on. But God forbid you put a step wrong, because it is absolutely unforgiving, and that's a very sort of sour side to the business. They don't like messiness, I would say. It's not a business where being unsure or questioning is really something that is very welcome, I don't think. I mean, I know I'm not talking about directors here. I'm just talking about the image that one is expected to put across as always being in control, surviving, great power, all this. And it's simply that it's just obviously not the reality of anybody's life.
No.
So why is it that, social media obviously has a huge part to play in all of this, but what is it we are trying to prove?
I have another experience, because I've been in this ensemble that creates our own music. We do like, I can't say Mamma Mia, but we take famous music like Monteverdi or Orlando di Lasso, and we put them together with a framework of and history like Boccaccio or something that is Renaissance related, and then we create our own interpretations. So my artistic director, he has had the same ensemble for almost 20 years, and some of us has been in the ensemble for longer than that. So he's working with us as individuals, and he is quite amazing, I'd say, because he always uses our strength and our weaknesses to our artistic advantage. So he always takes, if someone can't dance, he makes an artistic expression out of that, because they can't dance. And when I was supposed to sing this leading opera role, I wasn't really there yet. I hadn't gotten to that. So my voice cracked, and he was like, yeah, but use that. It's okay. I mean, you're devastated. You can crack. It's okay. Just go there, sing loud and ugly. It will be cool. And I was like, I'm singing at Drottningholm's opera. That is like one of the major houses in Sweden. I can't crack. But then I was like, that is kind of liberating, even for the audience, actually, I think. And I really like it when he does that. I've been so ashamed about some of the performances that we've done, but I can also see that the audience can relate to weakness and not to being perfect. So I've grown to actually understand his point of view.
I think the strange thing is that so many of the great operatic figures are women who are just experiencing the difficulties of life. Yet,
Exactly.
yet when that is reflected in real time back to a certain subset of audience members or casting or whoever it may be, it's sort of like, oh no, we can't, that's way too messy, that's way too much of a thing.
Wow.
It's interesting, the two positive examples we've had here, both from Allison with Pegasus and from Mia, are these sort of smaller companies. And I'm wondering whether in the business of opera, the kind of the international big houses with the freelance model where they have no loyalty, that it's always you fly someone in to fit a prefab box. Do you think there is potential for change within that, or are we looking to reframe the question and to change the institutions themselves?
I think you need to ask the management of the opera houses that question. Do they want to change? Maybe they do, maybe they don't. But I don't.
I think they are responding to changes in the world. So something like the George Floyd thing. I'm having far different conversations with opera companies all around England on all levels, whatever houses, than I had before that. Because the world has changed, the world's consciousness has changed. And so they see that they have to kind of step up. Whether they want to or not is another issue, but they see that they have to now change. So I envision and predict that down the line, there's going to be more diversity. There's and gender and all, women, that Me Too, all these things are changing the world. And I think smart companies are changing with the world.
I also like that things doesn't have to be perfect anymore. That is also what social media is doing right now. We've experienced 10 years of Instagrammers going, super beautiful. And now they're like, no, this is actually me. This is how I look without makeup, and it's okay. Mm-hmm. So I hope that might actually become true, because it's art. It becomes artificial if you always have to be perfect, surface. But you were talking about changes before, Alexandra, and I was thinking that I've been working with British people for 2 years. I mostly toured in America before, so I had more experience from the American framework. But now I've become aware of how much you look into diversity and how your country is, being a post-colonial country, you're much more aware of these issues than we are in Sweden. We have our own interpretation of these questions. But I watched at the Bridgertons, and I watched this BBC series Life the other day, and I was like, oh, this is so beautiful. Maybe it's political correct, blah, 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 but I really love it that people are, this beautiful actress who had only one arm, I was like, yes, finally. It's so, and she's there, and her problems are being portrayed, but not because she's a one-armed person, because she's a person. Mm-hmm. And people were of various ages, and every color was represented, and I was like, yes.
And it's normalizing those things, isn't it? Just making
exactly, which is exactly what the Bridgertons is doing as well. And I was like, oh, I love to see Black people portrayed as queens. That was so liberating. It's like, yes, I could totally see this queen, and I would love for her to be pregnant all the time. But you know what I mean? It's like, I love this. I know that it's, as an actor that wants it to be historically correct, but at the same time, I said, no, let's get representation in there. It's much more.
But what led the way to that, I think, is Hamilton.
Exactly.
The success of Hamilton. We can make lots of money. People don't mind. Okay, then this can be normal.
Money.
It's always about the money.
This is what we try to communicate in Key Change as well. It's like, yeah, you're always talking, especially the classical music scene, you're always talking about getting new audiences. Yeah, well, here they are.
But then we've also got to think about where those people come from. you know, if you look at the demographic of the students coming out of music colleges, I still don't think it's a particularly diverse bunch of people. So it's different to, it's such a different game to casting a piece of television where you can cast anybody. But the very nature of opera, the very thing that, well, it's a big question, what defines opera? But one of the defining factors of opera singing is you have to have a very specifically trained style and voice. And that in itself, you know, that there are not very many of us doing it. It's such a specific and unique thing. So,
but that goes back to your initial thing about education.
Yeah.
So if you want to diversify opera, you know, we have to start very young and going into places maybe the way you, and just opening people's ears and seeing if there's some talent. Oh, okay, let's, and then investing in that talent and helping them to think out of the box.
And in the training of the voices, this is the thing. There's great outreach programs happening. You know, there's a lot of excellent education work that goes on in schools to do with opera and classical music. But that's introducing them to the stories of opera and the drama and the language. But what I'm talking about here is building the voices, and that is what has to happen if you are to survive more than a week in an opera rehearsal room. And that's why the training is so long, and that's why it's a very specific process, is because it's a very difficult thing to do and to sustain.
But are there funded programs for this in the UK that you can apply for fundings or apply for programs that helps you with this if it's so expensive to do that kind of training? Or can you get like grants or such?
There's definitely grants and bursaries for, I think, music colleges. So you go and do a music degree, and your first study and would be the voice.
Then there's the barrier of applying and having the language.
That's my point. To get to that point.
When I was training post O level, A level, it was just a luck of the draw. So if your county had money to invest, my county had some money. I went to Junior Guildhall. They paid for my travel. They paid for my lessons. But not every county has the same money. I don't know how it is now, but
I need to jump in at this point. I'm loath to interrupt the flow, but we have some questions from the audience, which they're very keen to get answered. So I wonder if I can field some of those out. The first one actually speaks very much, it's directed directly to Kate and Anna from Nicholas Boyd Vaughan. It's what we've just been speaking about. So he asks, you mentioned changes that the government are making to education. Is it just that they need to change access and value, or is it also about diversifying the curriculum? What would you change tomorrow?
I mean, I don't claim to be an expert in government policy, but my understanding of what is happening is that arts education across the board, so drama, music, dance, especially those performing arts, but I think visual arts probably has the same problem, are being increasingly devalued. So as Kate was saying, at the GCSE level, there is an onus to take STEM subjects, you know, science, technology and maths. Because there's a point, the baccalaureate's coming in. I might be a bit vague on this, but those art subjects aren't as valued or aren't as seen as valued. I also know personally, anecdotally, so I've just made an audio piece. It's not a musical piece, but it was a verbatim. I went back to my comprehensive, which was bulldozed because it was seen as a failing school, basically. But it had a very strong, and it was in many ways very troubled place, but it had a very strong performing arts vision there, and we did do dance, music and drama throughout. No, you just did it. It wasn't a question of whether you chose it or not, and then you could choose to do it at GCSE. And one of the things I learned by going back to interview staff and students, many of the staff then went on into the academy system and talked about academisation. And it's anecdotal, but I do think it probably speaks to something has happened. And I know people that have gone on to teach of my generation. They've often got fantastic facilities. They've got the building, they've got the drama room, they've got the lighting rig. They can't afford to pay a teacher to teach it. And so we have a real, like, there are amazing outreach programs, I agree, from companies doing stuff, but a systemic thing that's happening is that the teaching and the funding of drama teachers, I'm talking about drama because I feel like I know a little bit more about that, is coming out of the system. And so it's becoming a much more one-off. You might be lucky to get a program come into your school and do a 6-week thing, or be part of an RSC outreach program or the Globes outreach or something like that. But what you haven't got across, you know, equality of opportunity is good quality drama teaching. And I notice it. I go into schools and I really notice the difference now of asking something basic, let's all stand in a circle. People aren't used to doing it. So I think it's both value. I hope I'm answering that. I think it's both value, but I think it really is funding. And I just think it isn't in the Conservative Party's general manifesto for the vast majority of people in this country, that they think the arts are for them, or they're for value, or they don't, you know. But, you know, interestingly, they all went to public schools which hugely valued these things. You know, they went to schools that had great arts programs because they see the benefit of it. And for me, it's not necessarily about the next great singer or director or dancer, but the value of having a broad artistic education for being a creative citizen of the world. You know, it's so I think it's those things for me. Oops. Go on, Kate.
Well, again, I am no expert. I can only say what I have seen, and what I think I have seen is that young people, if they could choose between classical music and musical theatre or pop music, generally they're going to choose pop music. Or they'll say, oh, I want to sing some Hamilton, or I want to sing this, and I'll say, well, that's great, but I'm definitely I can't do that, and that's not my area. So then what may be happening is that the teachers say, well, our students want to sing musical theatre, they're not interested in classical music, so they just stop, because they basically want to keep the students making music and singing. But then by letting that happen, you know, classical music, it can be hard work. It takes effort, it takes engagement, it takes patience. And that is something that I think just in general in society, we have less and less of. So the idea of a classroom sitting and listening to a 20-minute piece of music, sitting and listening and not doing anything else, and then perhaps discussing it, that to me is worth more than getting a music GCSE. So I haven't answered the question at all, but that's my view on it. Classical music, it's hard work. It's
demanding. I think you're pinpoint. I think you're right on target there. And also, like, train your voice. That is exactly the same. You need to be patient and you know, work hard. Those youngsters are not used to it.
I have an interesting question here, which is opening up a whole can of worms that we haven't even begun to touch on. It's from Gemma McGregor. She says, do you think that masculine qualities and behaviours are still being prioritised, whether for composers, performers, or all roles? I think we could have a whole session just on that. Anyone want to jump in? Perhaps with relation to either the repertoire, who gets to commission the repertoire. I know that, was it 2% of classical music in America last year was commissioned from women, which is quite an extraordinary statistic.
Can you say the question again?
So her question is, do you think that masculine qualities and behaviours are still being prioritised, whether for composers, performers, or roles?
I mean, the roles, I haven't been to the opera since like 10 years ago, so I don't know what has happened there in your new world. But when I was, it was so stereotypical. I mean, it was, I don't know if that is still prevalent, like mostly male singers, mostly male parts, and very standard old gender roles.
I think so often the women, as we've said, are portrayed as hysterics and crazy people, and Yeah.
I wonder also something.
I can't answer that question. I think that's a difficult question. It's not hugely been my experience, I have to say, but
Something that popped up on Twitter recently, I saw among some classical singers talking about difficult women and being called, oh, you're a bit feisty or you're a bit bossy in a rehearsal room. Again, language that we don't traditionally use about men. I wonder if this is where the question is heading and how far that's been any of your experience, that assertiveness leadership is still not seen as synonymous with being a woman or a gender minority.
I think there's a thing in opera, we tend to be a little submissive, I think, because, if we any opinion or attitude, we're a diva, and there's all that kind of terminology where it's sort of, so not submissive, but we play the game, and we do that, and we don't speak out as much as we might. What was it, Donald Trump, when the reporter says something, oh, she must be on her period or something. So there's all these things that they use to put us down because we have an opinion or we're strong, which they wouldn't say about a man. So we have to kind of just sort of toughen up and, keep calm and keep quiet a lot of the time.
I don't know if this answers the question exactly. It kind of picks up on what Kate was saying about dealing with mess in opera generally. I think whether we think this is a masculine quality or not, but my experience as a maker across different art forms, from opera, theatre, and making my own work is very much, I think there's a pressure or an expectation to be quite omniscient in opera. You're supposed to know all the staging when you come in. You're supposed to, have, what are they going to do? What are they going to wear? What are they going? And actually in theatre, it's less so. Yes, of course, you make lots of decisions before you enter the rehearsal room around design concept or and casting, of course, and all those things. But there's quite a bit more actually, that you discover it in the room with the people you're there with. And I think there's less space for that in opera. And I think that is to do with the schedules. I think it's less ensemble based. I think it's the way the rep is often written, that it feels a bit more jigsawy. You're supposed to be slotting this person into that staging, and someone will walk apart and someone else isn't there one day. And I think there's a kind of onus, to be omniscient, and whether we think that's male or not, I don't know. But I certainly feel like as a maker, I have to have a lot more answers going into the room. I have a lot less time to deal with open discussion on things, and therefore we probably don't encourage it. I would love it to be less like that. I'd love to, I don't think I have the best answers by myself at home. I think, the best work is created together. But that's my answer to that.
I've got one. Sorry, carry on.
I just wanted to say that I've always felt listened to in the rehearsal room. I can't think of an occasion where I've ever felt dismissed.
When it comes to composers, though, I guess the statistics speaks very clearly. I mean, Beethoven is played as much as all women composers.
We listen to when we're allowed to speak, but that's not always.
So we're not allowed to speak in the music.
Maybe.
Speaking of being allowed to speak, sorry, Kate, please carry on. One more question from Juan Sebastian Lewin. He says, you've talked about advancements in the diversification of opera. Do you think this can extend to improving job opportunities for trans, non-binary and gender fluid artists?
I think if there was ever an art form that was wide open to everyone, it is opera. I mean, it's just so clear. It's so clear. And if casting directors can be willing to get out of this box system as voice types, and this voice type has to sing this role and it has to sound this way, then there could be some, I think, huge scope and amazing positive changes in that direction.
Is the opera audience very unforgiving? I mean, do they always want to have what they set out for, or don't they like to be, given new ideas and such, or are they like always, no, we wanted to see Othello and that was not what we came for?
I think both. I think there's definitely people that want to see something new, but I do think that there's a kind of historical sort of ownership over the art form a little bit, sort of the historical, the great recordings, the great singers of the past, and the golden age of opera, which absolutely we shouldn't lose touch with or lose respect for.
So the new interpretation is to put it in like the Second World War or something like that, and not having a non-binary singer in the leading role.
We're always compared to the past, and so we will always be as singers compared to the voices of the past, and specifically the voices that sang our roles. And our job, I think, is to try and challenge those preconceptions within reason. We are still singing the music, we're singing it in the right language, and we're singing the notes in the right order. So I think sometimes there is a little bit of pushback, but I do believe that audiences want something new. Who wants to sit and watch the same production over and over again?
And I think it depends on the age of the audience. So older audiences, they are used to a certain thing. A lot of them want to see the same thing. Younger audiences want to see something different. So, and I think that maybe opera houses, not in Germany, but a lot of opera houses are playing to the kind of audience that they have had traditionally. But those audiences are dying out, and newer generations are coming, and they want there's scope for everything. It shouldn't be limited. But in terms of diversity, it's like, well, I want to see you can't play that role because you're black, that's a white role. And I'm like, why? I don't understand that thinking, because it's already a suspension of disbelief. So yeah, I was, when I was at school in America, they did Susanna, Carlisle Floyd, and what's his name, Blige, the baddie, he was a black guy, and the Susanna, I think I've got the right opera, was very fair. And I was really interested to see the outrage of the audience. And this is maybe 20 years ago. They were outraged. They were furious that this pastor, was it Blige? He's a pastor and he defiles the young girl. And they've consciously made a choice to have that sort of contrast in terms of her and how he looked, but the audience were outraged. They weren't ready. But that's how they change. We have to show them different things, and they start changing, and they start, even if it's shocking this time, it might not be so shocking the next time.
Well, just look at history. but when you do new pieces, like recent pieces, like how is the interpretation and the representation there when composers do new operas? Is it the same story all over again, or do they make changes?
I think they make changes.
Mm.
So if they're writing new works, do you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, well,
exactly.
They have the freedom to write about whatever they want and to
exactly. But do they?
Whoever they want. So I feel pretty confident that there are going to be some very interesting new ways of looking at opera. I think we're in a massive time of change for the art form.
I agree, but I was thinking, has it already taken place? Is there new operas that are only women main roles or something like that? And
yeah, I think there are.
Recently, Ian Bell's opera ENO, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think before we leap into the huge question repertoire, I'm just very mindful that we've run over time. So I'm going to have to bring it to a close. I really encourage everyone to carry on the conversation on social media, because we haven't even scratched the surface of an enormous topic, and we're just arriving at repertoire now, an hour in. But today is just the first day of Engender, and we've got a whole week of live performances, operas in progress, conversations and workshops. So this is really just the beginning. Please, everyone, go and have a look at the Royal Opera House website for more information. I'd really like to thank Rolex for supporting this Insight event, and of course a huge thank you to our panelists, Kate Royal, Allison Buchanan, Nia Tarnstrom and Anna Morrissey. So thank you all of you at home for joining us, and a big good night from all of us.